Commanders say their commitment to protect South Korea from North Korean aggression is, quote, ironclad. The statement coming as the USS Ronald Reagan is wrapping up a 5-day joint naval drill to prepare for any provocations from the Hermit Kingdom. Joining us now, Bruce Klinger, Senior Research Fellow with the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us, Bruce. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me.
First and foremost, the President's appearing on Maria Bartiromo's show tomorrow on Sunday Morning Features. She sat down with him and she asked about what's happening in the Korean Peninsula. I want to play a quick soundbite and get your reaction, if I may.
We'll see what happens. Now, with that being said, we're prepared for anything. We are so prepared like you wouldn't believe. You would be shocked to see how totally prepared we are. Wow. If we need to be. Would it be nice not to do that? The answer is yes. Will that happen? Who knows?
So a lot of Americans at home are probably thinking not to do what? You know, what are we prepared for? What are the possibilities and what is most likely going forward?
Right. Well, U.S. policy has always been that we would retaliate if North Korea attacked us and also perhaps preemptively strike them if we felt we had good intelligence that they were going to attack us. But what the President has added that's sort of new is what we would call a preventative attack, is even if we don't feel there's an imminent North Korean strike on us, to attack them to prevent them from completing an ICBM that can hit U.S. soil. So there's a lot of uncertainty as to whether the U.S. would do that or not. The administration has sent a lot of conflicting signals, and then my discussions with administration officials also getting conflicting signals. So the President is, on the one hand saying we will always respond, our military is ready for any kind of option that's necessary, but also still seems to be signaling that we may be doing a preventative strike. It's
so pertinent that we talk about this now simply because of the timing. The President has opened up the possibility to traveling to the DMZ. I mean, like you had said, we had seen presidents do this before. It's not uncommon, but it is uncommon with this level of tension. Am I right?
Right. Every president since Ronald Reagan, except the elder George Bush, have traveled to the DMZ. So it's not uncommon for a president to go. But as you point out, the tensions are very high right now. And also President Trump and Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, seem to have made this bilateral tensions personal. They've both insulted each other. Kim Jong-un has vowed that he might do certain things, and the president is also signaling that. So we do seem to be at a higher level of tension than what's always a high level of tension.
Politically speaking, at this point, now that we know it's been discussed, does the president have to go? And could that improve relations? Because what he says there would be heard more so than even if he said it on Twitter. Even if he wrote 140 characters, he's there.
Right. Some have advised that instead of going to the DMZ, he go to Camp Humphreys, a large U.S. Army base there, to give a speech. If he doesn't go, some might say he's weak, but I think that would quickly pass. But perhaps more importantly than whether he goes or not is what he says. If it's simply I am here, I'm showing U.S. resolve, I'm showing U.S. commitment to our allies, that would be very traditional and I think very well received. If he makes it more personal, if he makes comments about Kim Jong-un, then it will just escalate the tension more with Pyongyang.
When we talk about the U.S. naval drills, which some of our folks could see on the screen just moments ago, I'm curious as to, that's something that has not changed. We've seen that for decades now. But there's a lot more focus now than there ever has been. Is that productive?
Well, we've always had U.S. exercises in conjunction with our allies, and that's to show our commitment as well as to train the forces that we have in the region. Every time we do it, North Korea vows to respond. They see it as a preparation for an invasion. So the tensions always go up and then they go back down when the exercises are over. But now that North Korea is on the cusp of achieving the ability to hit the continental U.S. with nuclear weapons, including H-bombs, then now everything is much more tense. There's a feeling we need to lean further forward if we get indications that the North Korea military is about to attack. So everything is much more tense. We feel like we're more on a knife edge of a tension than we have before.
Right. Well, Bruce, we ran out of time. I wanted to bring up, obviously, Tillerson's comments on China, but maybe we'll have you back and we'll look forward to previewing perhaps that visit that we speak of. So thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Russia has demanded U.S. President Donald Trump return nuclear weapons deployed in Europe back to the United States to prevent an all-out war with North Korea. Putin also warned the U.S. that Moscow will give an instant response if Washington breaks the 1987 Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty by building banned weapon systems.
We believe that we managed to make the situation equal, If someone doesn't like it, for example, our American partners want to quit the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty altogether, our response will be immediate. I want to say that and warn, it will be immediate.
Speaking at the 14th annual meeting of the Valdai Discussion Club in the Russian city of Sochi, Putin also said the United States has frequently failed to fulfill its obligations under nuclear and chemical weapons treaties. The U.S. deployment of nuclear arms and missiles across Europe also drew an angry reaction from the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He slammed the deployment of the missiles, saying it's a key problem for Russia and China. Speaking at the Non-Proliferation Conference in Moscow, Lavrov said Russia is skeptical about the usefulness of further bilateral talks with the United States in line with the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or START. He added the world should not expect considerable results in the foreseeable future from talks over strategic stability between Russia and the United States. The United States has a history of quitting international agreements. Back in June, Washington pulled out from the Paris Climate Accord, and most recently, Washington threatened to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal, also known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA. Many believe the United States has repeatedly broken its agreements with North Korea as well, provoking Pyongyang to develop nuclear weapons to protect itself against any possible invasion by the U.S.
The United States has a history of breaking arrangements with North Korea, and so North Korea took the view, and I think not unreasonably, they couldn't rely upon the Americans to keep their word, and therefore they would have to take steps to protect themselves. So they resumed their nuclear program. Every time these agreements are made, they are broken, and they're broken always by the Americans.
In response to the U.S. moves, Russia has also upgraded its nuclear arsenal and beefed up its missile capability. The two sides now have as many nukes as needed to destroy the whole world several times over. Persistent tensions between Moscow and Washington have also revived Cold War fears and the specter of a nuclear conflagration between the two countries.
Obviously, Russian-American relations are not great, but Russian-European relations are not great either. I think it's a legitimate issue as to whether Trump will continue, President Trump, to honor the international agreements that earlier presidents have done. I raised that issue in a column in The Hill this week, in my regular weekly column, and I think it is important that Trump back off taking out various agreements. I think that's true. Now, I would emphasize that the things he has said have not yet been done. We have time on the Paris Accords. We can renegotiate the Trans-Pacific Partnership, some changes. Most of these issues that he's talking about are still open. What I think we need to do with Russia and the United States, and with Europe and Russia, is to have serious negotiations, particularly about nuclear weapons, both intermediate and long-term. I think that's important that we do it. I'm not surprised Putin says it won't work. He'd say that anyway. I'm not surprised Trump takes tough positions. He'd say that anyway. I think we have no choice in the world that we live in to try to work together, to try to find agreements that serve the interests of the United States and serve the interests of Russia and serve the interests of Europe. And I think that is probably what will ultimately happen, although there'll be a lot of loud talk between here and there for sure.
Adam, what do you make of that? Do you think that the current atmosphere is even conducive to really working together when it comes to all the treaties that we can list, be it the INF, the START Treaty, et cetera, et cetera?
No, it's certainly not conducive, because when Donald Trump campaigned on a platform of rapprochement and reconciliation with Russia, what he really meant is that Russia should somehow lean over and do what the United States wants, and then there can be reconciliation. Well, the United States is finding out from Syria and Iraq, from Iran to East Asia, that countries are not simply going to bend over and engage in the neo-imperialist quid pro quo model of American deals. America isn't really interested in the art of the deal, contrary to what Donald Trump said. They're into the art of the steal, whether it's stealing one's national sovereignty, stealing one's land, stealing one's oil, stealing one's wealth, stealing one's equanimity. It's all about theft. What this really all boils down to is that the United States has a keen interest, as articulated, frankly, refreshingly honestly by Steve Bannon, and this is a desire to destroy the One Belt, One Road trading, commerce, and international cooperation scheme of which China is the founder and Russia is the largest participating member. This is what it all boils down to. One Belt, One Road will empower the countries of Asia, Africa, and even into Europe to maintain their political independence while still enriching themselves using adaptations of the Chinese model. Also implicit in this is a move away from the dollar. The U.S. Federal Reserve is really the whip on the hand of the horse of U.S. imperialism. And until the U.S. realizes that there are other ways to make money other than through a Federal Reserve whose currency is the right now hegemonic source of reserve and trading currencies throughout the world, then there's going to be no chance at all for any dialogue or any type of cooperation on the very serious issue of de-weaponizing the world.
Okay, so Bernard Ďussia, I know you have a reaction to that, but I wanted to throw this at you, if you allow me, because, you know, it seems, and many people have been saying this for a number of years now, that the United States is still living in a world, in its mind at least, where it thinks it still gets to call all the shots around the world. You know, recently we saw it essentially take the first step possibly to walking away from the Iran nuclear deal. And now we have Russia and China obviously expressing their concerns about, and they've been expressing the concerns for a while now, about the missile shield, et cetera, and the treaties now that Russia has also spoken about. Do you think the United States needs to understand that it needs to respect really other nations to keep deals going, etc.?
Well, first of all, the United States, under Democratic or Republican presidents, does not want the world to just go along with whatever we say. That's simply not accurate. What I do think has to be understood by the United States, by Russia, by Iran, by North Korea, by South Korea, by Europe, what has to be understood is that to keep the world safe, there have to be agreements, bilateral and multilateral, that serve the interests of all of the parties. In this case, the interests of the United States and Europe, and also the interests of Russia. There's no doubt about it. I would say that if you look at the Defense Secretary of the United States, General James Mattis, he is superb. He wants diplomatic and political solutions. He does not want war. If you look at the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, another general from the Army, he feels the same way. If you look at the White House Chief of Staff, General Kelly, who's from the Marine Corps, the same way. These are people who want diplomatic agreements. These are people who don't want war. These are people who fully understand that you have to have agreements where both sides get something out of the agreement, where both sides feel it's in their interest to do it. Now, obviously, there have been various comments coming from the White House. I think this is no secret. There are also balances from the Secretary of State Tillerson, the Secretary of Defense Mattis, the Secretary of United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley, the White House Chief of Staff, and the White House National Security Council Advisor. They all want diplomatic agreements. One can differ on what those agreements should be, but what one cannot differ is to have an agreement. The United States and Iran, the United States and Russia, the United States and Korea, they have to be agreements that both sides conclude serves their own interest. And I think in the end, given the ugly alternatives, that is where we will go. Again, it won't be pleasant and easy and fun between now and then, but there's no alternative. We don't want another arms race, and we don't want a nuclear war, period. I think it's in Russia's interest, in America's interest, to ultimately negotiate both intermediate weapons and long-term weapons and all of the other issues that are on the table. I think that's where it will end up, but again, it's not going to happen easily or quick. I just want to avoid the propaganda, the overstatement, the talking points, and the political spin. Both countries, Russia and America, have major fundamental interests. If they talk together and negotiate, things will get better. If not, they won't. And I'd add quickly, that what Russia needs to do is to stop interfering in elections in Europe and in the United States, which the Europeans believe and the Americans believe. That doesn't help get the kind of negotiations that I think we all need and should want.
Okay, so Adam, you know, we know that Trump came into office wanting, seemingly at least, in his words, better relations with Russia. That has obviously not panned out ever since he has come into the White House. President Putin also was careful, that's something that at least a lot of the media picked up on, not to speak very negatively specifically about Trump himself. He spoke in general terms about U.S. establishment and U.S. administrations in the past vis-a-vis these treaties that he mentioned. So do you think that even Russia really is still holding out hope that President Trump is somebody who can actually be worked with?
Well, first of all, I think the remarks of the previous speaker really say it all. Just when I thought that it would be impossible to get more absurd than saying Nikki Haley wants peace, who threatens every country in the world she can't find on a map, and we can only wait in anticipation to see once she does find where these countries are located what she'll say. But now the idea that Russia is somehow meddling in elections in the United States and Europe, this isn't just the attitude of your guest. This is the attitude of an American elite that is so totally out of touch with the very brick and mortar of the modern world, that this is what indeed, as you said, speaks to Vladimir Putin's statement, where he didn't name and shame a single leader of the American regime, but he named and shamed a process. He named and shamed a phenomenon that has been going on from the end of the Cold War, when Russia, under its traitorous regime of Yeltsin, was bending over backwards for the United States, up to the present day, where the United States is enacting the same kind of patronizing, degrading attitude towards countries like Russia, like China, like Iran, like the Arab world and others. But this time countries like Russia have a backbone. They are going to stand up. They are going to fight back when challenged. They're going to speak the truth when they are met by absurd untruths, and the absurdity of the untruths coming out of Washington continues to get ever more ridiculous. And this is what America cannot stand. They want countries they can push over. They want countries that are defenseless. They want countries where they can hang the president of Iraq one day, butcher and then murder the president of Libya, the leader of Libya, the next. They want to have a situation where they could tear Yugoslavia, the most successful story of a multicultural, multi-religious, prosperous state in the history of the modern world, and they took its leaders and threw them in front of a kangaroo court that would make the 1930s Stalinists and Hitlerites feel ashamed and would blush. This is what the United States wants. And what Vladimir Putin said quite aptly is that in the 90s and in the short aftermath of the 90s, the United States could get away with it. They cannot get away with it any longer. They either need to wise up, or frankly, they need to shut up.
Okay, so Mr. Brent Podolsky, you know, there's a lot of issues that we can talk about if we go into specifics here about what President Putin mentioned. But one of the things he mentioned I want to get your reaction to is that, you know, the sanctions that he spoke about that were placed on Russia, he said that they were placed strategically in the sense that they were essentially there to squeeze Russia out of the European energy markets and to replace then, you know, what Europe would buy from Russia vis-a-vis LNG or gas for more expensive American LNG. Do you believe that America is playing a bit of a trade war, a bit of an economic war against Russia as well, where it wants to push it out of the way and make gains itself financially?
Well, I think generally the United States and Europe are allies there, all of whom, I would add, all of whom, contrary to what your other guests just said, they all agree Russia was meddling in European and American elections. They want to use economic leverage in order to, as an alternative to war, as an alternative to military conflict, to get to a relationship of mutual respect where Russia is not interfering in the French election, the German election, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and obviously the American election. Now, the fellow you just had on the other end, he praised a long line of dictators, and I don't want to have a 2-hour show, but man, oh man, what a collection of unsavory killers, murderers, despots he just praised.
No, that would
That's
be the
not
CIA.
The United States
that would
doing
be
that.
George
Now, let
Bush.
me finish.
That would be Barack Obama.
No, let me finish. No. Look, you know, let me urge our audience, anybody that does name-calling, slogans, talking points, BS, propaganda, ignore it. The United States and Russia both have an interest in security and stability. That will require some arms control of intermediate and long-range missiles that both countries are a part of and that both countries ultimately believe they benefit from. That is the real.
Okay, because we're running out of time, Brent Brodowski, I wanted to interrupt you. I do apologize, but I wanted to push you on that point, then, Brent Brodowski, because you mentioned the treaties, and you know, Russia points out, and I'd like to ask you, why do you think it is that the United States has not yet destroyed its chemical weapons stockpiles, as it has signed a treaty with Russia to do so?
Well, that there are some that have been destroyed and some that haven't been, but fundamentally, we have to get beyond the name-calling, the tension. We have
Mr. Brodowski,
right now
I apologize because I want to
world.
push up on because it's a fact, isn't it, that the United States has not lived up to its bargain and its end of that treaty, and no one really mentions that. I mean, only President Putin has brought it up, but no one really.
No,
there's no uproar about it.
It is not a fact that the United States violated the treaty and the Russians kept it. That is not correct. But the point of it is, these things have to be discussed, negotiated, and solved. And the place to do it is in a negotiation that's out in the open. We have a Secretary of State, a Secretary of Defense, and the other people I've named. They want diplomatic solutions that serve America's interest. They understand that a diplomatic solution has to be seen by Russia as serving Russia's interest equally. That's what diplomacy is. That's what our people want, and that's what I hope we end up getting.
Okay, Adam, how do you feel about that? Because, you know, this sounds a lot like, and I don't want to put words in Mr. Brodowski's mouth, but it sounds like renegotiating treaties again, which sounds a lot like renegotiating the Iran deal, which we just heard from President Trump a few days ago.
Well, indeed, this attitude from the United States shows that they cannot keep their word. And this is why North Korea, looking at the United States breaking its own promises with Pyongyang, now taking an Iran deal which every country in the world, minus the Israeli regime, which says a lot, concludes that Iran is in full compliance with the JCPOA, and they want to throw it out. America wants to have its cake and eat it too. And so deep is this hypocrisy, this wellspring of lies, that we have your guest opposite stating that everyone in Europe somehow believes that Russia's meddling in elections, and yet everyone in Europe isn't pro-Russian by his own admission. They're saying things that are anti-Russian. Now, if Russia was meddling in European elections, one would think logically that everyone in Europe whose elections have been meddled would now be pro-Russian. I don't hear it. I'm listening for it, but I simply don't hear it. What I do here, however, is a bit of creeping pragmatism that when people in Europe need to put their money where their mouths are, all of a sudden ideology goes one way and pragmatism goes another. Why should they pay three countries like Poland, like Germany, like frankly all of Central and Eastern Europe, why should they pay 3 times more for liquefied natural gas, which can't even get to Europe quick enough in the winter months, where they have a comparatively economic Russian pipeline that's shipping the gas in? So this is why we're seeing people in Europe say, maybe we've taken this ideology too far. Maybe we've taken the name calling, which your guest opposite has mastered far better than anyone in Russia. Maybe they've taken that too far. It's not about Russian interference, it's about dollars and cents, which is what this whole thing is about, even though the United States continues to hide behind the empty rhetoric of neoliberalism that's taken the living standards in America and put them into, frankly, the toilet. But if we strip back this propaganda, if we strip back these slogans, what we can really see is that all countries want to live in an environment where they can conduct free deals, fair deals, advantageous deals for both their own country and ideally mutually. And this goes back to what Chinese President Xi Jinping said. We need to get into a situation where we think of win-win. America thinks of insult and dominate, colonize and dominate, kill and make war.
Okay, we're quickly running out of time, so I want to get both your final comments. We have about a minute left, so Mr. Brodowski, I'll give you 30 seconds. What do you think will happen going forward? Because, as I described, Russia does feel surrounded. The missile shield, it says, is targeted at it. It feels that it's been sanctioned out of Europe, as in, you know, the gas, energy, etc. Will the United States be able to understand its point of view and do something about that before negotiating properly?
Oh, I think they have to start negotiating properly right now, and I include the United States and Russia. Most of the European countries agree with what I said, not with what the other guest said. That's why there were still sanctions. And on the Iran deal, I think that there is a good chance it will stay and work. I support it staying. If there could be negotiations on other matters, there should be, and that's a good idea. But Trump did not withdraw from the Iran deal. He did not do that. So I think all of these issues, and by the way, Korea the same way, can be resolved diplomatically, not by name-calling, not by fantasies, not by propaganda, but by countries looking out for their own interests intelligently and negotiating.
Adam, your thoughts on that? 30 seconds. Go ahead.
We just heard someone who thinks that every election in Europe is rigged by Russia in the favor of Russia, and yet everyone in Europe, mind you, these are Russian puppets, somehow agrees with him. I think he made my closing argument for me.
Very well, gentlemen. We'll leave there at that. But of course, as always, we do appreciate both your contributions to the debate. We'll have to have you both back on to have a rerun of this. That was Adam Gary, managing editor of Duran.com, speaking to us live from London. And we were also joined by Brent Badowski, columnist